Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday and welcome to the webinar. I'll let everyone get in. Feels like it's like a virtual line to get in the building is what this is. As you're logging in and getting adjusted and settled, open up the chat and let's have everyone introduce themselves. What's your name? Where are you coming from? What institution? And then what role do you have at the institution? So we can get an idea of what different disciplines are in here, what different institutions are represented. We'll probably have a wide array. Awesome. Hello, everyone. I'm looking out for any familiar names. I'm very jealous of folks coming in from Houston. I wish it was warmer in Chicago right now. We'll get started in just a moment, but just a few housekeeping items. The chat is open. The chat is meant for sharing ideas. And there's also a Q&A function. So if you do have questions for the panelists, make sure to use the Q&A. With the Q&A, as you ask questions, you can upvote, you can answer them. So if a peer asks a question, you can actually answer that. And then we'll answer those live throughout the webinar today. And yeah, anything you want to throw in the chat, it's open for you. I'll try my best to keep up with the chat and the Q&A. We will stop throughout this session to do polls. There'll be a survey at the end, and then also at the end, we'll do a longer Q&A. And as a reminder, if you do have to leave early or for any reason you have to hop off, the recording will be sent after the session. So you will get an automatic email, I believe on Monday with the recording, if not on Tuesday. So welcome to the webinar. This is the third webinar in a series between the League for Innovation and Packback on generative AI. With us today, we have Kathleen Borbee and we have Dr. Rufus Glasper. So I'll introduce myself, have them introduce themselves, and we will get started. My name is Kelsey Behringer. I am a former high school chemistry and physics teacher. I joined Packback about 5 years ago to help instructors implement technology into their courses. I'm incredibly passionate about using technology in a classroom so that we are striving towards student excellence, more engagement, higher levels of critical thinking. I'm now the COO of Packback, so I oversee all of our customer-facing teams. So Kathleen, would you mind introducing yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, I am a faculty member at Monroe Community College. That's in Rochester, New York. I had a career of over 30 years with IBM, and I am incredibly passionate about bringing real world experiences into the classroom. And I have been a Packback user since 2019. I raised my hand when I first heard about it and have been using it ever since.
And we love having you as a part of the community over here. And then Dr. Rufus Glasper.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Hello and welcome. Rufus Glasper, President and CEO for the League for Innovation in the Community College and Chancellor Emeritus for the Maricopa Community Colleges. I'd like to welcome you to our ChatGPT and Generative AI webinar series. This is hosted by the League for Innovation in the Community College and Packback. If you were able to join the last two webinars over the last month, welcome back and thank you for your participation and your curiosity. If you were able to attend the Innovations Conference 2 weeks ago here in Tempe, Arizona, it's great to see you again. The League for Innovation exists to support institutions as they tackle the challenges we face now and in the future. Over the past 3 years, we've been hit with what feels like a tidal wave, an online push due to COVID-19 pandemic, a stabilization in the hybrid environment, and now the generative AI revolution. During today's session, panelists Kelsey and Kathleen will dedicate some time discussing innovative approaches to the most immediate threat to student persistence and excellence, the ongoing misuse of generative AI. I want to encourage every audience member to only dedicate so much innovation to detection, and instead shift our mindsets towards prevention. Because I can promise that preventing misuse of generative AI is a challenge we'll be facing in the years to come. The League for Innovation in the Community College is proud to partner with Packback, an organization that values sound pedagogy and utilizes AI to teach students how to critically think, question, and communicate written ideas. The League aims to share a variety of unique perspectives, and today, Packback is one of those voices. Today, I also hope you walk away with a new deep insight, a greater understanding, or a new perspective towards innovation in the community college. And now, expect to be demystified. Welcome. Kelsey?
Thank you so much, Rufus. I love that, prepare to be demystified. So as Rufus mentioned, today is all about demystifying and navigating AI detection. And I'll chat a little bit about why we want to invest time and energy into talking about detection. But really what you'll find is today we are going to chat a lot about prevention strategies. So expect to learn a little bit more about detection, but then also have really wonderful conversation and hear from our wonderful panelists about preventing misuse of generative AI. Now, if you have joined our previous webinars, our first in the series between the League and Packback was all about instructional AI, so utilizing artificial intelligence to actually teach students. Our second in the series was talking about how we could actually be using generative AI in our classrooms, or at least discussing generative AI with our students. And then today is focused on detection and prevention. So I have a colleague today, Caitlin Kern, who will be able to, in the chat, share a link to our past webinars if you are curious in learning more about those. Now, I want to pause briefly and talk about why it's so important for us to demystify and navigate detection. The reality is on November 30th, I believe the date was, ChatGPT was released. And I can't remember if it was a month or a week, I'm kind of fuzzy on that. It reached 1 million users. And to compare that, Netflix, I think, took a year to reach 1 million users. What happened is we have students on TikTok, we have Instagram, we have email, we have text. The access to information allowed us to learn about this so quickly, right? And if you read about generative AI, researchers like economists, they're talking about this as, similar to the creation of the internet. The difference is the speed at which we're seeing this proliferate is like nothing else we've seen before. And part of what we will discuss today is going to be GPT-4, which when we started this series less than a month ago, GPT-4 wasn't even available yet. So it's super important for us to look to our community and stay informed with all of this new information, because alone we're not going to be able to keep up, right? But if we take the time, if we look to our community, if we join sessions like this, if we have conversations, we can stay informed and be at the top of the tidal wave instead of left in the wreckage of the new innovations. So we're actually going to get started right now with a poll. So let me go ahead and open up our very first poll. Let me see if it's going to let me launch. There we go. The launch button was hiding. All right, just open up the poll. Have you used ChatGPT yet? Have you input one of your writing prompts into ChatGPT? And then have you experimented with GPT-4, which, by the way, is only accessible with a ChatGPT Plus subscription? I'll give everyone about 30 seconds to answer this. All right, I see about half of us thus far have used ChatGPT, but a good portion of us have put our writing prompts into GPT. So that means if you've used it, you've probably put your prompt in. That's what I'm saying with this data. All right, I'll go ahead and end the poll and I'll publish the results so you can see the breakdown. All right. You can take a look. What I want to do is start by sharing a little bit about how large language models work. So I can see in this results of the poll that about 45% of us actually haven't used GPT. So why don't I just explain how it works so we can all have a baseline understanding, which will also help when we talk about how these detectors work. So GPT is a large language model, right? And ChatGPT is just a really cool technology that has a large language model with a chat interface over it. Now, how it works is a statistical model. GPT was fed trillions of pieces of data of text, right? And what it does is it uses the data it was fed to predict the next word in a series of words. So not all heroes wear, Kathleen, how am I going to end this sentence if you had to guess?
I don't know. Capes.
Exactly. In 80% of all text fed to human beings and ChatGPT, capes 80% of the time. Now, 5% of the time it says pants. I don't know what it's saying the other 85% of the time, or 15% of the time, probably something silly. But the best way to think about a large language model, even though it's probably not fair to the creators of it, super powered autocomplete, turbocharged autocomplete, but it is a statistical model. And the best way that I've had it described by an English instructor is it's not like there's the Wizard of Oz on the other side of the wall magically answering your prompts as a content expert. It just has a lot of data to run off of. Now let's talk about how detection works. So if you are familiar with plagiarism detection, we take a piece of text and we search a database and we look for matches. And plagiarism detectors are able to bring you, basically, for lack of a better phrase, forensic evidence. This is your student's work. This is a matched piece of text. You can see that they're overlapping. Now, AI text detection could not be more different. It is not looking at a database of every single thing that has ever been submitted, or I would say created by GPT. What detection is doing is using that statistical model in reverse, right? So it is basically predicting the likelihood that AI generated text based off the fact that we know the most statistical likely word in a series of words. So how closely does a piece of text align to what AI would have written? And then it's also able to look at things like how random is the submission, because when humans write, they say random things, right? When I write, I speak very colloquially, I use odd metaphors, I speak about my own personal life. So GPT is not going to be able to be me, at least not quite yet. And this is an example of Packback's detector in action. You can see a likelihood of detection. Now, what is so important for us to understand is that plagiarism detection provides forensic evidence. We have factual information we're able to show students. This was an article published 10 years ago. This was your paper. AI text detection is a likelihood. It is possible your student wrote what an AI detector is saying was AI created. So there is no forensic evidence. It is circumstantial. So we need to navigate these pretty carefully, because if we do say, hey, student, I think that you have submitted AI generated text, we need to be able to have a productive conversation that's not going to immediately to a student maybe panicking. So that's what we're going to talk about right now, is how we navigate detection and how we navigate those student conversations. So I'm going to open up our second poll, and I want to hear about our relationship with detection thus far this semester. Have you suspected student misuse of generative AI in any of your submitted writing assignments? Have you used an AI detector? Have you facilitated a student conversation after suspected misuse of generative AI? I want to see some of these answers. I'll leave it open until we get about 100 responses. It's fun to watch it. I don't know, Kathleen, can you see the answers coming in, or is it just me?
Oh, it's just you.
Okay, it's very exciting. I feel like I have all this insight. So it looks like it's about 50-50 thus far of us thinking we've caught some AI. It looks like about 30% of attendees have actually used an AI detector. So let me go ahead and end the poll, and I'll share the results so you can see. We've got about a 50-50 split, not exactly, on if we've suspected misuse. Only about 27% of us have used a detector, and about 14% of us have had a student conversation. So expect to share your some of your perspectives in the chat in the next few minutes. But let's talk about navigating detection. The way that I see detection working is actually much more nuanced than just using an AI detector. I actually see it as three different kind of components. First is how you establish a baseline of a student voice. Second is going to be how you review something with your own eyes as a content expert and as an educator when you are suspicious of, AI generated text. And then third is what you do once you actually have some evidence or proof that maybe this was AI generated text. So I'm actually going to have Kathleen start this conversation by talking about how she establishes a baseline of her student voices. Would you mind sharing your approach here?
Absolutely. Well, in all my courses, and especially my online courses, I first have students do an introduction. I have them do it both in a video form. They usually have to create some sort of a collage photo, things that they feel represent them, sort of an about me, and do a video introduction. So I'm establishing some sort of an oral communication baseline. And then I also have them do a very simple about me that will be used down the road in another assignment in a written format. And we're not talking about a long paper, even just a one-page paper, but it has to have a structure, intro, body, conclusion, that type of thing. And it doesn't have to be flowery. I just want to see where they're coming from. I'm a business professor, so I'm all about, be brief, be bright, be gone. So that's kind of like you say my icebreaker, if you will. It's a combination of video and written baseline for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. So I think establishing a baseline is so important because something I heard from another instructor is almost like, if you have that baseline, in your case, you have a recorded video of them speaking, you have a written assignment from them, you're going to be the best detector. You're the subject expert, you have a baseline of their voice, and it's almost like you don't need the detector if you have that knowledge and that background. I saw a great question come up in the Q&A, and Caitlin's going to address it right now, but access to AI detectors. Packback does have a free detector, and Kathleen will chat a little bit about how she's used detection in a moment, but Caitlin will share the link to Packback's free detector, but also in the chat, if you've used other detectors, share what you've been using. I know there's GPT-0, there are a couple of different ones that have popped up. I'd imagine this is about to be an area of technology that booms for better or for worse. Now let's talk about what happens once you have spidey senses going off or a detector tells you something has likely been AI generated. The best thing you can do is do a human review, because like I said, there is zero forensic evidence with these AI detectors. It is only a likelihood. So you have to think of it as a gut feeling. So what you need to do is go collect data. And these are some great ways to collect data in a writing assignment. Score it. I was telling Kathleen, if a student uses AI generated text and they get a 50%, they kind of, they paid for it. And you might just want to give them feedback of, hey, this just didn't sound very human and you didn't do well. You didn't meet the assignment criteria. Come into office hours, let's chat. Check the sources. The sources may be real. Are they relevant? Are they real? We know that GPT will sometimes make up sources, but check for specificity and randomness. Check for human behavior. That's something that is still, I would say, pretty unique to student writing. Check for content accuracy and again, alignment. Sometimes GPT will just be wrong. We saw that with example of it answering the question, who won the Super Bowl? It just got nothing right. And then last, compare to other writing samples. So this goes back to establishing that baseline. Really quite important. So have your kind of playbook for human review down, because again, 9 times out of 10, you'll be a better detector than an actual AI detector. But if you couple both of them together, you've got a powerful pair there. Now, I do want to talk about what happens once a detector says this doesn't seem human, and your gut says this doesn't seem human. So Kathleen, you actually had an example of this recently. Do you want to chat a little bit about your experience with detection?
Absolutely, sure. And remember, this is all new to me this semester, as it is to most of us, right? So I am actually this semester for the very first time using Deep Dive, which is the detector that Kelsey was speaking of, part of Packback. My students, it's accessible from my LMS. My students submit their work in. Basically, the assignment is in this. I set up a rubric, and it actually is helping me structure everything very nicely. And I have complete control over what I want to emphasize. Is it content? Is it spelling, structure, grammar, that kind of thing? I put percentages on things, and then the detection tool, when I go to grade them, 100% of the content is on me. So the very first thing I do, without even looking at anything, is I go right to the content area and read the paper and say, if I was grading this on content, what would I do? And then I actually take a look at what the detection engine is telling me. We would score them here on spelling, grammar, here on structure, this and that. And I'll look at that and I'll say, well, I get where they're coming from, meaning the detector, but I might even give them a fewer points. I can have control over that, but it'll give me a big alert. And I had a big alert from a student, and it was only one student actually, but I went and read it and it's like, oh, likelihood, as Kelsey said, but there was a 99.9% likelihood that this paper was generated with ChatGPT. That's pretty strong likelihood. And then the detection engine lists all the reasons why it came up with that score. So it's very granular. And I thought, ooh, this first time for me. So I explained to the student, mark them down, whatever, this is the reason. Thinking I was going to get pushback, I got no pushback, no response at all. So I'm thinking, aha, okay. So now I'll be honest, I'm looking for that student to perhaps try it again. Maybe you try it again. I don't know. Maybe you think this time I'm not using the detection tool. You never know what's in student mind, but I'm obviously much more aware of that. And I invite, questions, but when you get no questions, it's pretty obvious they feel like, whoops.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's happening is students are getting flagged for AI generated text. Instructors are having these gut feelings. Instructors are assigning a 0 and either saying, hey, let's talk, or waiting for the student to respond. And it's very telling if a student says, hey, let's set up time, or they just kind of go dark, kind of admitting defeat there of, oop, I tried and I got caught. So one thing I do want to talk about is just when a student does say, hey, let's chat, or when you do say to a student, let's have a conversation, just how to go about that. Now, I will admit, when I was a former teacher, I was very much like organized chaos, very Montessori in my approach, very much giving benefit of doubt to students, right? I was very much honey instead of, sting, or carrot over stick. So I like to acknowledge that my pedagogy is unique to me. And generally at Packback, our pedagogy tends to be very, very, very forgiving towards the student experience. So I want to acknowledge that and just provide my recommendation from, an instructor from that experience. But also I was a bad student most of the time. So this was the approach that I appreciated. So my biggest recommendation is to go into a conversation with curiosity and as much objective perspective as you can provide. So this is my experience. This is what I saw. And then approach with curiosity. Ask them about their process. If they can really confidently document their writing process, they might not have used AI and they might have just written a really generic piece of text, right? Especially if they're trying to mimic an academic style or what they think is academic, they might end up toning down a lot of their voice. and sounding like a robot at the end of the day. So that's a great teaching moment for us. I would always recommend the chance to resubmit if a student does outwardly admit to using generative AI. They are admitting, and I do think we have a choice there to say 0, never do it again, or why don't we have you resubmit your assignment within realistic time frame. That would be my recommendation, because again, that student's probably never going to do it again. And then I think having realistic expectations, knowing that students, if they are, pre-full brain development, might not admit to using AI even if they did, because they're scared of the consequences. So keep expectations realistic, approach with curiosity. And again, a great example of detection conversation is explain why you want to hear their voice. Say, hey, I didn't hear your voice, and this is why I want to hear your voice. It's helpful for me as your instructor. Kathleen, any other thoughts about like how you would approach a conversation with a student who clearly used AI generated text?
Actually, what you said, really echoes sort of my approach to things. I'm always about, submit again. It's like, one strike, you're out. Oh, no. And, learning, I mean, isn't that what we're all about, especially in the community college? We're here to learn. And if we make one mistake, how can we learn if we're not given a chance to learn from that mistake and do it again? So I'm all about the resubmittal. And then, of course, I'm going to look at the resubmittal versus the AI generated piece and, okay, lesson learned type of a thing. So that's all I can say.
Yeah. And you said it yourself, like, this is new to us. It's new to our students. Like, this is all new horizon. So for us to immediately all be on the same page, it's an unrealistic expectation. We're going to really need to, I think, kind of learn through failure together with our students, right? Everyone is starting from the exact same spot. So
in order to succeed sooner, right?
Yep, exactly. So let's talk about GPT-4. So if you're unaware with the kind of this, new release, ChatGPT was and is powered by this large language model called GPT-3. Now, again, ChatGPT was launched in November. It's already released its 4th version of this large language model, and want to show you this to give you a, context of how quickly this technology is improving, and provide some context into why detection just is not enough if we want to be ahead of the tidal wave and not in the wreckage. So GPT-4 was released, I don't know, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. I'm totally off with time here, but it is accessible if you have a GPT Plus subscription, which of course I do because I'm obsessed with this technology. It's $20 a month. So that is something to be noted, is that your students might not yet be using GPT-4 because it is behind a paywall. With GPT-4, you get 25 messages every 3 hours, and it is available in the United States only at this time. Now, I'm going to actually show you an example of 3 versus 4 in action. I already pre-typed out this prompt, and I've genuinely am using GPT's advice in my life now these days. So this was the prompt I gave it. I want to take a vacation in late July. I love being active. I love fun, walkable cities, great food. I like beaches, but I don't need it for a great vacation. I live in Chicago, hello, from the Midwest, and would be open to international travel. I just don't want to spend more than 7 hours on a plane. Where should I go and why? Estimated cost for one person. This is GPT-3 telling me that I could go to some cities in Canada. I could go to Mexico City, California, Colombia. And it's giving me a 1-sentence reason, 2-sentence reason why I should go with the estimated cost, right? Including airfare and accommodation. It gives me a nice little summary. So this feels like maybe something I'd see on Reddit, I don't know, or, something I could see as like a quick where to go for a long weekend if you live in the Midwest. Now, keep in mind, this is GPT-3. I asked the exact same prompt to GPT-4. What I got was one specific location, and basically a 2-page paper on why I should be going to Lisbon, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to Lisbon in the summer. So if anybody wants to join me, you have my contact information. I have a multiple sentence reason why I should be going to Lisbon. And then I have a cost of a 7-day trip, a breakdown. airline, accommodation, food, activities. And I also get the recommendation of, hey, if you want to save money, maybe travel in this time frame, it'll be cheaper. So you could see how different these two answers are. And maybe I'm just still in my blown away phase of GPT-4, but I hope this models for everybody how quickly this technology is progressing. Another update is these AI detectors right now are not very accurate. So, GPT released its own detector and said it was like 26% accurate, right? And that's with GPT-3 text. The accuracy of a detector is actually cut in half when fed GPT-4 text. So here is what we need to know as educators is that detection is always going to lag behind the quality of the output, the generators. So if we're putting all of our eggs in the detection basket, we are going to be losing, right? What we need to do is invest more in prevention strategies, make our students not want to go to an AI detector or make an AI detector, or sorry, not an AI detector, an AI generator, or make it superfluous, right? We need to come up with really strong prevention strategies, and that's the game we need to play. Yeah, detection can be a safety net, but we know that detection is not going to be accurate, really trustworthy or accurate in the same way that some of these generators are increasing their exponential kind of power here. So I don't know, Kathleen, what were some of your takeaways? Because I showed you this a few days ago. What were your takeaways, the difference between 3 and 4?
Oh, for me, it's obviously 4 is much more robust. And so it's a scary thing. Where are we going with this? I mean, I've had very limited experience with 3. And now I'm thinking, and as we grow, how are we going to set boundaries with this? There was a comment in the chat. I don't want to try to mess up our Q&A here, but from John Baldino, very good point about, are we teaching real world consequences by allowing resubmissions, and how are we going to, do we have, because of GPT-4 being so, if you will, upgraded and harder to detect, are we going to have a zero tolerance thing? The jury's still out. It's kind of a scary thing. Where do we go with this? At least now I would say from a resubmission, or, you can resubmit, but you're going to start at a C, kind of a thing. You don't get to resubmit at 100%. And, where do we go with this? It's hard. It's really hard.
Absolutely. And a good question too is, if you were really, really, really clear with your students day one, and every single assignment prompt had really clear expectations, you had a policy, you had students sign something. If you were incredibly transparent up front, I think that does give you wiggle room to have a zero tolerance policy. I think if we started the semester without a zero tolerance policy, and if all of a sudden we catch something and we had never communicated to students our expectation, I think that's where I fall into the gray area of, I would probably lean towards student leniencies. And it really depends on what we've done at the beginning of our semester to set expectations. So that's kind of the way that I would frame it, is I never like to punish students for something that maybe I didn't communicate clearly up front. But if I was super clear about it, then yeah, I'm probably going to tell my student, no, I gave you all the grace, I gave you all the understanding, I want to pull that back. So
I'll just say that's a great point, because this process has really forced me, and I'm a very detailed person, to be even more detailed.
Absolutely. Which we're going to talk about your assignments in a moment, because they are stellar. So, if there's one thing you take away from today, who knows what that will be, but I hope deeply it is that you leave this webinar wanting to invest a little bit more in prevention strategies than than before you joined, because again, detection will always exist. There are going to be people who are constantly tinkering with detectors in the same way there are going to be people constantly tinkering with generators, but they're always going to be behind. So detection at best is going to be 50 to 75% accurate, even at its best. So what can we do to prevent misuse of AI? Because I, as an instructor, as a lover of writing, I don't want misuse of AI when it is better for a student to learn to write. Now, ways that you can prevent AI. Input your prompts into GPT. If GPT is acing your prompts, you need to change your prompt. And it doesn't mean today, it doesn't mean tomorrow, but maybe over summer, that's your summer project, right? And what you can do is modify those assignments to be more authentic. We've done a lot of webinars on authentic assessment if you want to take a look at those, but if you had to grade 200 of these papers, would you be bored out of your mind? And that's a great example of an assessment that you probably shouldn't be giving your students. So is it fun for you to grade? Is it fun for students to do? Is it personal? Does it require a lot of compare and contrast, maybe gathering of information, synthesis of information? Choice is always a great place to start if we're trying to give our students a little bit more intrinsic motivation. But explain to your students your expectations and why. And Kathleen will talk about this in a moment, but I think across disciplines, there's always a really good reason students need to learn how to write. And it's not just in English classes. And then allow students to discuss it, because if you actually ask your students, hey, all right, for the next 3 months, all you use is GPT for writing. What happens to you at the end of those 3 months? Your students will get to the exact same conclusions that we're getting to in these conversations. They are going to be able to identify that if they rely on GPT as a crutch, they will not learn the content. They'll get there. You just have to give them the opportunity to get there, right? So maybe have a discussion in your course about this. Now, Kathleen, I want you to chat a little bit about the prompt you've been giving your students or how you do your writing assignments, because I think personally, a student might be able to use GPT to do it, but it would take them 20 hours. It would be really hard. So yeah, share a little bit about your assignment that you give students.
Well, and actually in my current use of Deep Dive, I'm refining and restructuring as well as I go. So an example, I teach marketing, product development, and every textbook in the world has the standard steps of product development. So I want my students I have them watch a video of IDEO, the Stanford-based product development company. And then I have them read a particular article that summarizes the Stanford mindset of design thinking, and then I say, so look at the video and make specific references in the video saying when they said XYZ in the video, and how did what they do in the video connect to the design thinking model they try to follow, and then compare and contrast that with a specific step within the text as outlined within a standard text. So they sort of have to connect three different things. Is it perfect? Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but I am much more attuned now to try to structure assignments like that than I've always thought I've done it, but now I'm sort of hyper vigilant about that.
Absolutely. And in the last webinar, our panelist, Heather Olson, talked a lot about like a really strong scaffolded assignment is pretty difficult to perfectly complete in GPT. And I think that's an example of a really strong scaffolded assignment. You're going to start here, you're going to use this resource, then you're going to do this, and then you're going to use this resource. And it's very structured in a way that GPT is just not going to be able to, I think, ace in the same amount of time as your student who would just benefit from doing the assignment to begin with. So there are so many different ways you could approach modifying your assignments to be more authentic. And it's a matter of playing around. What can you do that is motivating for a student? What can you do that's hard to game for GPT? And I would meet in the middle, right? Because we don't want to just like make our assignments GPT proof by making it harder. We also want to make it so that students are more intrinsically motivated to do it themselves. We want to meet in the middle there. Now, Kathleen and I have been having amazing discussions, and I'm going to ask her a question in a moment, but a question just came in the Q&A that is, have you ever used a prompt that asks for an opinion on a topic? All of the time. This is basically exclusively how I use GPT is make choices for me, because I make enough choices every single day I'd love to not decide what to make for dinner. And it's usually good at framing as like, hey, I'm not going to make a choice for you, but let me lay out the pros and cons of each option. So i.e. my travel plan, it will not give you an opinion, but will give you an objective lens of how to make a decision, I would say. So that's a great question. And let me go ahead and mark that answered. But Kathleen, you and I were talking a lot about writing developing writing skills isn't just about developing writing skills. It's about so much more. The impact of a strong writer is so much wider in scope than just being a strong writer. So I want to hear from you, like what, being a strong business writer, what does that mean? What's the scope and the impact of being a strong business writer for, a business instructor?
Well, all of my courses that can be are what we call here at Monroe Community College writing intensive, or WR courses. And people say, oh, but you're not an English teacher. I said, no, I'm not. But in business, being able to articulate your ideas, both verbally and in written form, is absolutely critical. And again, I want my students to learn how to write simply, because I constantly telling them they need to translate that also into emails. They're not necessarily email smart. And when I always tell them, I have people come in, guest speakers, and they say, yeah, if you write a really bad email, that you've put that out there, and that email can be shared with the entire organization. And, best case scenario, if it's terrible, you're going to be judged, whether you like it or not, as perhaps being lazy. Worst case scenario, you're going to be judged as being not intelligent enough for the position. So, and you don't want to be there. So I try to really say, learning how to write well really translates into, job performance and enhancement in the real world. I was an example. My son works for a small construction firm, and they are trying to change the impression of construction firms in the city of Rochester. They're a disabled veteran owned, and they're, really rebranding themselves and doing this and doing that. And they have excellent crews. But my son is the chief estimator, and he's like, every single thing, every piece of information, every letter, every memo, everything we put out has to be on brand, has to be structured, has to have a template. Because if our bids aren't perfect, spell checked, written well, then the perception is that our work is sloppy. If our writing is sloppy, our work is sloppy. And that's just not true, because we have some of the best people in Rochester, but he's all about changing the image, the brand, and the value proposition to the customer by starting with writing. So I found that very interesting as I was talking to him about preparing for this seminar.
Yeah. And I love that example, because writing isn't just, I'm a good writer, look at me, I'm getting a PhD in English, I need to be a good writer. It is an imperative skill in any trade. And I was sharing with you, I write most every single Friday in an internal memo that goes to my team. And that memo is so important because it's one of the only opportunities I have to speak to all 110 packbackers. And it celebrates our wins, it documents progress. And so somebody on our sales team knows just as much information about company progress and improvement as somebody on the engineering team. And, me having the ability to communicate through the written word, the impact is so much more than people are aware of what's happening. They're excited about what's happening. They're energized by what's happening. They leave for the weekend feeling positive, and they come back to on Monday ready to work. So the scope of the written word is just so important, even if AI is generating that text.
Right.
Who's reviewing that text to go to the audience? Who's making sure that it has the right tone, the right impact? So even if a student isn't writing the word, they still need to understand the impact of that writing and be able to modify it, right? Mm-hmm. Now, the second question I want to ask is, Question I feel like selfishly I want to dig into, because people who love writing may use GPT. That's it. That's a given, but they probably won't misuse it. They're not going to copy and paste without editing. They're not going to use it 100% of the time. How can we actually just help students develop a love of writing across all disciplines? And maybe if not love, a respect. And the example I use is that I journal almost every single day. Some days I miss it, especially if I'm traveling. I either do it at night or I do it in the morning. Journaling for me is expressing gratitude. It's processing my feelings. It is a form of therapy. It's a form of meditation. I can't sit still, so it's a form of meditation for me. And if I didn't have the ability to write, I think I would be a much different person, and I love writing. So what could we be doing to make our students love writing so that they don't misuse GPT? I think that's a really important question for us to ask. So Kathleen, I don't know if you have any thoughts, especially because you teach business writing, and sometimes it's like, let's be concise.
Right, it is. But there's a couple of things, in the chat in terms of embracing ChatGPT. And actually, I agree with that. I mean, I think saying, zero tolerance, this and that, how can we use that? I know somebody who has a very high position with Amazon Web Services. And she actually works with K-12 school districts across the country. And we were chatting about this, and she said, oh my God, I love ChatGPT. It has really helped me so much. All these different reports I have to write, I'm getting much more productive because it'll give me a start. And then I need, as a content expert, I need to know what to put in that start for this particular school district over here, or what this one's doing over here. But so I think that's the approach we have to get to, of how can we use this, and how then can the students put their voice and have it be a tool that they're using, just like we use any other technological tool in our work world.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And if you missed the last webinar, there was a conversation a lot about the implications of generative AI and equity. And the reality is, you're going to have a high school in a state, in a city that, last week they started teaching how to write amazing GPT prompts in their English classes and their, technological literacy classes. And then you're going to have a high school down the street that bans it. Which student is probably going to be successful in their career 5 years from now, once they're graduating college? One was taught how to use GPT like a pro, and the other was told that GPT shouldn't be used and it was banned, right? At the end of the day, we still need to teach our students critical thinking skills. We need to teach them how to ask questions. We need to teach them how to work through the process of writing. And they do need to communicate themselves professionally and personally. But we also have a duty to teach them how to use these tools responsibly. Just like I use the TI-89 as my tried and true example as a former chemistry teacher. They needed it to do a lot of problems. They could not do chemistry without their TI-89, but at the same time, if I didn't teach them how to use it, paperweight or a projectile missile in my classroom, right? Painful. So it's really important that we kind of, I think, live in moderation, where we don't ban it, but we're not 100% reliant on it.
Right. I agree.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, Kathleen, as we close the webinar? And if you do have a question for Kathleen or myself, or for just the entire audience, throw it in the Q&A now.
I'm just, I'm new to this, like I said, like everybody else. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be, we have spring break here at Monroe Community College next week. And I'm thinking, I'm going to be spending next week, like, working on this. I feel like all week long. I have to get really, really good at this.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you want a good place to kind of start to understand, I taught science, so how can I teach my students how to use it within the science discipline? You have to start by using it yourself first, right? You have to become comfortable with the platform, how you can use it, and then it will become easy for you to start thinking how you can teach your students to use it.
Exactly.
So I think of like feedback on writing, right, is a huge one. Or I would ask them to ask scientific questions and then fact check the responses. That's probably where I would be starting, is teaching how students how to fact check responses from AI, because I would get nervous about them relying on it for scientific topics, I think, is where I would be.
Right, right. I'm going to do some I'm going to see how well it does at math. That should be very interesting.
Yep, exactly. Well, if you were able to stay through the whole session today, thank you so much. The recording will be sent, I believe, on Monday or Tuesday in a follow-up email. If you are curious to learn more about Packback, we have a writing and a discussion platform. You can email one of our team members at curious@packback.co. And then we do have a free suite of tools that do incorporate GPT for educators. So if you are like, well, how do I get started? It's Packback Labs. It's called Teach with GPT. You can find it somewhere in this chat too, and we'll share the link out. But Rufus, any final words before we end the webinar today?
I just want to say a great webinar. I do have a final question.
Yeah.
And it's one possibly to you, Kathleen. Is it too early to recommend any kind of adoption and change of practice and or policy at the department level or the system level, or are we still in this due diligence stage at this point?
Well, I've sort of been like John the Baptist in the desert within my department just this semester. But again, remember, I'm just starting to use it since January. And probably I would say it's probably a little bit too early, but not too early to start talking about it. We need to start right now and come to some agreement, some sense of what we as an institution are going to be doing. Without dragging it on for a year, because that's way too late. As Kelsey started, what, 1 million users in a week or something, or a couple of days. So we have to up our game academically to make some decisions sooner. But at this moment, I think it's probably too early. I'm just running around explaining it to people who really haven't done anything with it and getting them to just think about it.
Well, I'm speaking as a past administrator and a past level of other types of areas of paranoia. And what we might want to do, Kelsey, over the next few weeks is just to gather some information relative to the kind of policy question, because I think from a board perspective, with so much discussion going on around this topic, from an administrative and a board perspective, it would be helpful to kind of get a sense of what other colleges might be doing or thinking, and help. Hopefully it will stop institutions from being too impetuous and adopting something that will change weekly.
Yes.
So just trying to get ahead of the conversation, but thank you. Great job.
Yeah, that's a great point. I encourage folks. I know about 50% of us have used GPT. The first thing you should be doing after you press end on this webinar is heading to GPT and using it yourself. Start by asking it some fun questions, input your prompts, and that will definitely help move forward the timeline of having policies. I don't think we have a perfect policy, but again, this is moving at the speed of light. And we're not going to be able to stay on pace, but the harder we try, the better we'll be doing for our students, specifically as we're trying to, achieve student excellence. Thanks so much for joining today. Thank you so much, Rufus and the League for Innovation, for giving us the space to share our pedagogy and share information. Definitely recommend that you lean on community right now. It is not up to you alone as an individual human to be an expert on GPT. Rely on resources. There are so many webinars right now that you can attend. We'll continue to have these webinars as often as we can, but there are others as well. And have a absolutely wonderful week. If you are in the Midwest, enjoy the sun now that we have it. Bye, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much.